All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio. Night of the Doctors here on INN World Report. We just listened to Dr. Murray Susser, and now we're going to listen to Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. Dr. Tarpley was on the show last week. He's got an awful lot to say. You know, we just had elections and whatnot. And hopefully we can even entice him to cap off the amazing conversation he was having with us about the Anglo-American-Russian triangle throughout history. And I must say, friends, thanks to you listeners, Dr. Tarpley's talk about this subject on C-SPAN is like right up there. So thank you all very much. Webster, welcome back to INN World Report Radio.
Thank you very much, Tom. How are you doing?
You know, I got to tell you, just thrilled from the information, but anytime you come on, it's always a great event. Webster, I know you've got other things. If I could implore you, if we could just finish off. I'm getting emails from listeners that were enthralled by our discussion about Russia, the United States, and Great Britain last show. So if we could just sort of speed it up, you know, the 19th century, World War I, the Russian Revolution.
Wait. Let's try to do justice to what we've cut off so far, right? In other words, rather than running away from the Civil War era, maybe we should tarry there a little bit and just maybe round out some of those points. Right? The idea,
your time.
For people who might not have heard that, right? Just to bring them up to speed, the great untold story of the U.S. Civil War is how the Russian Empire, and specifically Tsar Alexander II, helped Lincoln to save the Union. And they did this the Russian Empire did it by issuing, in effect, threats to Britain and France, right? Britain under Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell. Lord John Russell is an immediate ancestor of the great Bertrand Russell that a lot of people still seem to think had something good. And then, of course, Henry Gladstone, who became prime minister repeated times. And then there's also France under the proto-fascist dictator Napoleon III, right? Napoleon III and the British under Palmerston, Russell, and Gladstone, and Queen Victoria, they were eager to attack the Union, to put an end to the U.S. experiment, right? A democratic republic on a large scale with a big diverse population. They were itching to attack, and the thing that prevented them from attacking was the threat coming from Russia. Well, if you attack Lincoln, you're going to find yourself in a world war because it's going to be U.S. and Russia against Britain and France, and that was too scary for the British and the French, and the way this was manifested so that everybody in the world could see it at the time was the Tsar sent his Baltic fleet to New York Harbor, which arrived there on September 24th, 1863, right, 6 or 7 ships, and then a similar group that arrived from Vladivostok arrived in San Francisco on October 12th, and they stayed during the entire critical fall, winter, spring 1863 to 1864, which is one of the last times that this foreign intervention is threatened. And specifically, what it meant was that with the Russian fleet headed across the Atlantic in September, September 1863. There's a famous meeting. It's a clash between Charles Francis Adams, right? Charles Francis Adams comes from the line of John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Charles Francis Adams. I think he's a son of John Quincy Adams. He's the U.S. ambassador to London, and the British are building these 2 ironclad battleships at the Laird shipyard, and they're about to let them out, right, and send them to the Confederacy so the Confederacy could try to break the Union sea blockade. And Charles Francis Adams feels strong enough based on the Russian fleets to say to Lord John Russell, if you let those ships out, you will be at war. And this scared the hell out of the British. because they knew that a combination of the U.S. Navy and the Russian Navy would have destroyed the British merchant marine, and would have gone far, kind of like submarine warfare, right? Starve out the British Isles. So this occurs, and it's therefore a really decisive turning point. So this fact is generally suppressed, and it's funny. Just in the past week, right, since I was on your program last week, I've become aware of a book which has been launched. Right, it almost seems as if it was concocted to answer what I've been trying to argue. Right, it's a guy called Perino, P-E-R-A-I-N-O, and he has a book called Lincoln in the World. And I must confess that I haven't been able to look at the book. I don't have it in my hands. But based on what he says in his interviews, he's gotten interviews on the PBS NewsHour. His publisher was generous enough to put an ad for him on National Public Radio in the morning. And it seems to be another one of these pseudo-scholarly studies which continues this really unfortunate and inexcusable tendency of suppressing the main fact, which was that Lincoln had one friend in the world, and it was Tsar Alexander II. In this guy's interview on the PBS NewsHour, he says, oh yeah, Lincoln had to deal with a lot of things. He had to deal with the British. He had to deal with the French. And at a certain point, he says, and a Russian fleet showed up off the East Coast. Well, they didn't show up off the East Coast. They came into the port of New York.
As if by magic.
But it was a huge parade and a huge gala ball and dinner. And, it was the high point of the year. And really, I think this is what set the stage for the proclamation of Thanksgiving, right? The Thanksgiving holiday, which we're now, looking forward to celebrating. This was proclaimed by Lincoln on, I guess it's the 3rd of October, 1863. And this is very much under the influence of this tremendous optimism and lift that is given to the Union forces by the fact that you've now got this colossal, powerful ally coming on the scene, and they're really terrifying the British and the French, who had been so arrogant and so hostile and what have you. So,
well, Webster, speaking of arrogance, and I know you hate it when I interject, but I have to do this because
sure.
There's a nugget that I learned from you from reading your articles now on this and looking at your talk at the National Press Club, which, friends, is available on C-SPAN. Please go to C-SPAN and query Webster Tarpley, and you'll see this talk about the Russian. Let me just say,
the other way to do it is you go to C-SPAN, you take a look at it. It says Video Library. You click on Video Library, and then that shows you scroll down a little bit, and it offers you most recent programs, most watched. Click on most watched. It'll show you the first 6. Click for another 6, and then you'll see this program on the Russian fleet. So please click on it, even if you don't have time to watch the whole thing. Sorry.
Webster, trust me, I'm an IT guy. My way is much better. Just go to C-SPAN. There's a search box. Go into the search box and type Webster Tarpley, and wham, it takes you right to it. In any case, either way, Webster's way or mine. Webster, look, I find that you've educated me to this, and I think it's highly significant. And I mentioned it last time. I'd like to go over this one more time. There's a couple of aspects. Why was it that Alexander felt such affinity for the United States, number one? But even before that, why was it that he had the foresight to send these fleets? Isn't it true that in their arrogance, in their hubris, the colonial empires of Great Britain and France went to him and said, hey, you want to get in on this action?
Yes.
We're going to go break up the U.S. Go ahead. Tell us about that.
Now, remember, the prelude for this is, the context for it is, the British are essentially running wild all over the world. This is the absolute high point of the power of the British Empire in the world is from 1848 to about 1870. In 1848, all the governments of Europe were overthrown by these pseudo-revolutions. It's very much like the Arab Spring. If you go to my website, I have some articles in 2011 where I compare the fakery of 1848, the so-called springtime of nations, with the fakery of the Arab Spring.
The color revolutions of their day.
Yeah. So Louis Philippe of France overthrown, Metternich of Austria overthrown, Prussia overthrown. Everybody overthrown except Russia. And then in the 1850s...
And except Great Britain.
Well, of course not.
Of course, Britain, never overthrown.
Britain supports all revolutions but her own. Right? The British are sending... Mazzini is a British agent. Bakunin, the anarchist, is a British agent. Ledru Roland, some people that are not so well known, right? They're British agents. In other words, there's this famous letter where the King of Belgium writes, who is British origin himself, he writes to London. He says, look, you guys have a zoo. You're keeping a zoo in London, and you let them loose on the continent of Europe to destabilize everybody. It's like Londonistan in our time, right? It's this famous Londonistan is that every, fundamentalist crazy can find a home in London. Well, in those days, it was Marx, Mazzini, Ledru Roland, right? Anybody who was going to destabilize a country. Kossuth of Poland, people like this.
I think that's an important fact. The music means we're going on break, okay. Webster, so we'll be right back. But this is, friends, what Webster's saying, this ain't nothing new, all right, to be Brooklynese about it. These color revolutions, this is an old tactic. We've seen it in the Arab Spring. Same old, same old. Webster Tarpley, our guest tonight, Tom Kiley, INN, right back after this. Welcome back. Always fascinating. You love them, you hate them. Webster Tarpley in the house. At Webster, I must say, you're vitriol for the likes of Ron Paul and Rand Paul. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but Rand Paul certainly has his hands full right now with history and writing and whatnot.
But the copycat, I guess, little Rand.
By whole entire paragraphs, apparently. But anyway, that's another show.
Now listen. Now that you brought up the unmentionable, in Virginia, this candidate Cuccinelli, right? Cuccinelli wanted to be governor of Virginia. The kiss of death came when he invited Ron Paul to come into Virginia, and Ron Paul gave this speech advocating nullification. That any state can simply say, I don't like federal law, I'm not going to obey it. That is unconstitutional. I'm sorry. Not only is it unconstitutional, that ended at a little place called Appomattox Courthouse. A lot of people had to die to sort that out. That question cannot be reopened. And of course, nullification, as Martin Luther King said, right? These are racists with their lips dripping with nullification and interposition, and that's just a step towards secessionism. And one party that was destroyed by flirting with secessionism was the Federalists, and this was New England secessionism, right? This was the Hartford Convention of 1814 and 1815. They said, we don't like the War of 1812. We don't want to fight for the United States. We want to deal with the British. And they became so smelly and so disgusting that the Federalist Party finally collapsed. And that may now be what's going to happen to the Republicans. And if it does, we can say that little Ron and the leprechaun and little Rand were the gravediggers of the Republican Party, because they got this, this white supremacist neo-Confederate thing going. And that is deadly. Anyway.
Along the lines of the history and British intervention to try to bring this country down, maybe Rand can get together with, or Ron Paul can get together with the House of Windsor and talk about the nullification of the Constitution. But anyway, that's another discussion, I suppose. But anyway, why don't we go back? Webster, pick up, please, where you left off. We're talking about this world dynamic.
1848, right? Yeah. 1848 is this. It's a time of revolutions, or at least destabilizations, all over Europe, right? So every government in Europe is overthrown, really with no exceptions. except the Tsar of Russia.
And except England.
Well, yeah, but this doesn't,
No, it's important. Webster, there's revolution everywhere except always in England.
Because they're the ones who are fomenting it.
Thank you. That's exactly why I say it.
Okay. So look, the point is then they say, well, we've overthrown everybody. Louis Philippe, Metternich, the King of Prussia, all the Italian states, right? Total chaos. We got to get Russia also. So they start this thing called the Crimean War. And the Crimean War is the British, as always now with Napoleon III, their little puppet, and Turkey, Ottoman Empire joins in. And this is the thing, the charge of the Light Brigade and all this fighting in the Crimean Peninsula and the Battle of Balaclava and all this other stuff. But they don't get anywhere with it, right? They can win some battles. They can put the Russian Empire in distress, but they don't get anywhere, right? They don't have enough land forces, so they got to go back to the drawing board. But what you've got to understand, and this is an antidote to things I've seen on C-SPAN, right? You get these historians, right? Fake historians in the tradition of Howard Zinn or this guy Kuznick, who writes for Oliver Stone, or Cockburn about, how the U.S. is so aggressive and conquers everybody. If we look at what the British did in the mid-19th century, the British
comparison.
The British attack, they overthrow every government in Europe. They attack Russia with the Crimean War. The British wage 3 opium wars against China, forcing China to let in the opium that the British East India Company is growing in India. The French, under British auspices, invade and conquer Mexico, and they put an Austrian archduke on the throne of the Mexican Empire. The French are also invading Indochina. They set the stage for the Vietnam War much later. You've even got
was that what British help, or under the British auspices, or did they do that one on their own?
Napoleon III is a British puppet. He's their creation.
Okay.
He was in 1848. He was a cop. He was a policeman in Britain, just to make sure that none of the revolutionary bacillus got across the channel. So he's a complete British stooge, and a lot of people don't quite get this, but that is what he is. Right? He's the land forces for the British. The British provide the Navy, and then Napoleon provides the ships. Another thing is, during the U.S. Civil War, Spain retakes the Dominican Republic. So they want to violate the Monroe Doctrine. They seize this island. And of course, the most fundamental, the Confederate States of America are just unthinkable without British Freemasons, right? The Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction. It's a complete British project from beginning to end. The only hope of the Confederacy, apart from defeatism or, the collapse of the North, is that they want to get the British and the French into it. So Alexander II of Russia can see all of that, and he says, I don't want to be left in a world where the British have no more competition. In other words, what the British are trying to do is to establish a world empire which has got no serious military opposition. The U.S. is a center of opposition. Russia is a center of opposition. So they want to break up both of them. They want to dismember the Russian Empire, and they have a plan to do that, right? It's actually published during the Crimean War. And they want to break up the U.S. into not just 2, but 3, 4 more pieces. The other challenge that emerges ultimately is Bismarck and the unification of Italy, of Germany, right? Prussia, and so forth. So Bismarck becomes a threat, and that is why this period of maximum British power goes from 1848 to 1870. In 1870, it comes to an end because the British have lost on the Civil War, right? The Confederacy is crushed. And then in 1870-71, it's Bismarck destroys their puppet, Napoleon III, and creates this powerful German land power. So that's sort of the context. So it's a time.
That was what, 1851, did you say?
which one now? 1871.
1871.
Unification. It's the Franco-Prussian War. In other words, it's a war between France under Napoleon III and Germany, more or less under Bismarck. So that essentially shuts down this attempt. In other words, what the British were going for is technically known as universal monarchy. In other words, suppose you have a situation...
New World Order.
Huh?
New World Order, we call it these days, I think.
New World Order is a very bad slogan. I would stay away from it. It was invented by this Mormon lunatic Cleon Skousen or whatever his name is. And it is designed to muddy the waters because there is no world order today, right? Russia, China, these are not really parts of this, whatever it is, in the same way that London and the echelon powers, right? The English-speaking world is one thing, right? But even continental Europe is then a very different proposition. But it is simply not the case that there's a new world order. It's misleading because that appeals to people who hate foreigners and they don't know much about them and they don't want to know. But now look, here's the other interesting thing. Suppose the British go for it. In other words, they say, look, we're going to attack Lincoln and the Union. As you were mentioning, in 1862, at the same time that General Lee and the Confederates is bringing his slaveocrat army into Maryland, the British attempt to recruit Russia for an attack on the U.S. And I guess we need to pause.
let's take a little bit of a pause here.
Let's resume with that because that gets us to the heart of the matter right away.
Of course. I have one quick question about Bismarck. I'll ask you maybe off the air. Maybe we can go back to it. But anyway, friends, as always, Webster Tarpley, it's a fascinating discussion. Right back. All right, good friend. How appropriate this song, Jewel in the Crown from Fairport Convention about the British Empire. Great song, great interview, great guest, Webster Tarpley. Webster, let's get right back to it. It could have come down to a world war, I guess, before there were such things. And that would have been awesome. I mean, that would have really been something. The nascent United States, I don't know how big a power we were at the time, but certainly Russia, a gigantic country with lots of resources, and Great Britain, tiny country, somehow also lots of resources. What would have happened if push came to shove back then and we did enter into a world war?
This is the fascinating issue. Let's go back to now September 1862, because we can see this from a number of points of view. We know, as a matter of general diplomatic history, the British and the French approached Russia saying, "Oh, this is so terrible. These Americans are killing each other. We are such humanitarians." I have to say in parenthesis, the British humanitarians had just crushed the Great Mutiny or Sepoy Rebellion in India, and they had killed 300, 400, 500,000 Indians, right? They just massacred everybody. It was called the Devil's Wind. The siege of Bangalore, right, was one of the legendary things. So the British East India Company has committed significant genocide in India, and we're supposed to believe that the British government in London is humanitarian concerned about the situation in North America. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, the British and the French, having completed, they're in the middle of that chain of, running amok worldwide with aggression and genocide. They go to Russia and they say, look, why don't we have a joint initiative to tell Lincoln, to stop, let the South go, and if not, we're gonna go to war with you. Now, it's known that the Russian Foreign Ministry called in Bayard Taylor. Bayard Taylor went on to be a pretty famous writer, and the Russian side gave assurances that they would never, ever join in any initiative against the U.S. And that was known, but it took a little more digging, at least from my point of view, to come up with is this guy a U.S. banker by the name of Wharton Barker. Wharton, I don't know what relation he is to the Wharton School, but he may well be. Wharton Barker was like a financial agent of the Russian Empire in the U.S. and in Europe. And in the 1870s, Tsar Alexander II called him in and he said, I want you to know this because I think people really don't understand what I've been doing all these years. And he said, the British and the French came to me in September 1862, and they said, "Dear Tsar of Russia, let's all gang up on Lincoln and the Union. And what do you think?" And the Tsar, as he tells Wharton Barker later on, I sent back to them the following: I will not join in this. I will not approve it. And instead, if you try to do this, I will regard that as casus belli for Russia, and I will declare war on you, London, and you, Paris. So if you attack the U.S., the Union, you're going to have a two-front war, whether you realize it or not. And then he said, in order to make sure there's absolutely no doubt, I'm going to send my fleet to North America, and one east and one west. And he did that then in the following year, right? By the time this incident took place, it was getting to be the stormy, November, December in the North Atlantic. So that was not a good idea for that season. So he waited to get maximum effect until August, September, October, 1863.
Sandbag.
Sorry?
We call that sandbagging, where you delay for a strategic advantage.
Yeah, great. He delayed, but he also made clear, right? If you do this, then the declaration could not have been clearer. So that's the only lifeline we in the United States got against the Confederacy, and the Confederacy was getting all kinds of support from the British and the French. Now.
And of course, this is enlightened self-interest. He's not doing this just because he happens to like Nate.
No, but look, this is
not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not trying to say that, but I mean,
the most valuable and durable alliances are the ones that are firmly based on mutual interest. Not based on some, romantic gesture.
I only say it to highlight the danger that he saw in the world with the. In other
words, what he says is, I didn't want Russia to be alone in a world where the British had a monopoly on advanced industrial technology.
Now, I'm going to really
did this for Russia.
I'm going to really upset you.
I wanted the U.S. to continue to exist so that we could have access. Russia could have access to advanced industrial technology and science through the U.S. because the British would embargo it, right? The British would prevent this stuff from coming out. But now, look.
Wait. I have to interject. I'm going to really upset you, but I'm going to be brief. It seems to me what you just said was foreshadowing, fast forward to the end of the Second World War. Once again, the British are concerned about an American-Russian alliance in the world, overshadowing them, perhaps supervising the decolonization project. I'd love to get into that with you. Certainly, maybe not tonight, but do you promise?
As they are right now today, Tom. In other words, what do you see in the Middle East? You see the idea of a U.S.-Russian condominium running the Middle East, and then you see the British come up with Assange, with Snowden, with Greenwald. They've even got this legendary degenerate, Russell Brand, is now posing as a revolutionary leader. And what is the point of this, right? It's to somehow, gather up some forces they can throw at the U.S. and at the same time they're attacking the Winter Olympics in Russia and God knows what else. In other words,
didn't Bandar Bush threaten the Russians about the Winter Olympics supposedly?
Yes, he did, but some of that he does on his own account. Anyway, let's not go. Let's get back to this moment.
Absolutely, as long as we can get to that other moment someday in the future with me.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, look, okay, let's go. Okay, back.
That other stuff is known to some at least, but now here's something that is known to almost nobody. What would the military lineup have been? Suppose Lord Palmerston and Lord John Russell and Gladstone decide that they're going to attack the U.S. because they think the Russians will back down, or they think they can assassinate the Tsar of Russia with their anarchist forces, or
which they end up doing.
A faction in the court, right? They've done all this stuff. And remember, the craziest of these is Lord John Russell. And again, these people who think that Bertrand Russell was a humanitarian. Remember, Bertrand Russell was mad as a hatter. He wanted to drop atomic bombs on the Soviet Union when there was a U.S. monopoly, right?
The guy was a blue blood, right? I mean, right? Wasn't he?
He's an oligarch. But I'm trying to tell you that these people are strategic lunatics and madmen. So anyway, it's perfectly feasible for Lord John Russell in 1863, 1864 to say, damn the Russians, I don't care about them. So here's what you get. The Russian fleets are going to be in New York and San Francisco. Okay, their orders are, if anybody attacks the U.S., the Russian fleets go to work on them. And then, even more important, the Russian land armies, right? They start moving perhaps into India, perhaps, attacking Scandinavian countries that the British are supporting. So you immediately get the U.S. and Russia against Britain and France. And remember, Napoleon III has got an army in Mexico, so he can start attacking the U.S. into, the southern states, right? In Texas is the Confederacy, but he can send his French army to fight alongside the Confederates.
All it takes is a lot of greed and, the idea that your opponent might be wounded. All right, Tom Kiley. All right, good friends, welcome back. As is typically the case when Webster Tarpley comes on the show, our cup runneth over. We're going to have him back. I know many of you were fascinated by his last visit, and we ended up talking about the origins of the Russian Revolution. I got a lot of email. We didn't get there yet, so we're going to have to. I will drag Webster back to continue. But Webster, please continue with this thread of history, this lost history.
So look, it's the World War that didn't occur, but came very close to occurring. So the U.S. and Russia, we've gotten to that point, right? The U.S. and Russia are now at war with Britain, France, and the Confederate States of America. And the French already have a land army in Mexico that, they can somehow, march overland, perhaps, I don't know, and bring that into play against the U.S. And of course, there's naval warfare. The British send squadrons to Halifax, Nova Scotia. They tried to burn and destroy Boston, but especially New York. However,
during the Civil War, they tried that? Or are you talking more about?
This is what would have. They had the plan ready to go.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Plan ready to go. That's in my talk, right? If you listen to my talk, I quote a Royal Navy hydrographer. This also, it's in a paper on my website, tarpley.net. It's called "Wrap the World in Flames." It's an essay on the same topic, more or less. So look, U.S. and Russia against Britain, France, and Confederate States of America. The French army joins the Confederates. The British try to send redcoats to Canada, but the British have no way of dealing with the monitors. The British have ironclads, but these are ironclads with very deep draft. They can't come in close to the coast. So if the British try to send ships like in the St. Lawrence River, the monitors, the U.S. monitors can destroy them. And the British have nothing like these monitors. But now let's follow this a little bit further. The French have to transfer military forces to Mexico and perhaps to Canada also, because they have the big land army, right? British land army is generally pathetic. Now, Otto von Bismarck in Berlin is watching this, and he says, aha, the French are weakening their forces along the Rhine. I'm going to take advantage and roll over them. So he manufactures a pretext. this is eventually what he did with the famous M's telegram, right, to get himself into a war with Napoleon III. It's easy to do it. Napoleon III, you just insult him and he loses his temper and you got a war. So pretty soon it's going to be U.S., Russia, Prussia, Germany, against the British, the French, the Confederates. We have to put the Spanish Empire is in on the side of the British and the French, right? Because they want to increase their control over Santo Domingo, over some other places in the Caribbean. Portugal, of course, the oldest ally of the British, bar none. They're going to come in on the British side. But now, once Prussia is at war with France over the Rhine, this then is likely to bring Austria into war, because remember, Austria and Prussia are at each other's throats. They're actually going to have a war. In real history, they have a war in 1866, right? The 7 Weeks War, Prussia against Austria. So Austria likely to come in on the side of Britain, France, Confederacy, Spain, Portugal. You add Austria to that because they're hostile to Prussia. Wait a minute, though, it's more complicated. As soon as Austria joins the British-French side, Italy, that is to say Piedmont, the kingdom of Sardinia, right? The Cavour, right? Cavour would come in on the side of U.S., Russia, Prussia, Italy. Now, in the middle of this, Mexico is going to be against the British and the French because they want their independence back. Ireland, it's possible that the Irish rebellion against the British would take place early, right, in the 1860s rather than later on. China has been under attack by the British and the French. They're sympathetic to the U.S. and Russia. They come in, U.S.-Russia side. And I think we can assume that India, right, having just been crushed by the British in 1857, the Indians would say, now's our chance, right? The British are going to be tied up. We can get them. The one that is harder to figure is the Ottoman Empire, right? The Middle East, Turkey. They had been certainly on the side of the British and the French in the Crimean War. So maybe they go with the British and the French. But what you see then lining up, let me just summarize it. U.S., Russia, Prussia, Italy, China, Mexico, Ireland, India, against British, French, Confederates, Spain, Portugal, Austria, and Ottoman Empire. That would be the world war of the 1860s. I think there's little doubt that Russia, Prussia, and U.S. are going to win that. And notice the way the breakdown works. All the colonial powers are on one side, right? All the colonial powers and the Confederacy, which is
the major colonial powers anyway, right?
Huh?
The major ones, I guess, Austria and Germany and Russia were
wait. Prussia has no colonies,
right?
Zero. So there's no colonies on that side.
I mean, they want some, or they just they don't have them?
They have. There's not even Germany yet. It's not even united. It's going to be united in the course of this. Now, believe me, all the colonies in the world are on the British, French, Spanish, Portuguese side. So what it means, and it's likely to bring a rebellion in India, especially if Russia sends an army through the Khyber Pass and into northern India, then that's the end of the British Empire right there, because that means the fall of India.
No way they're going to be able to cover that, right, with how overstretched they are, right?
Well, and the British fleet can't do anything about that. So the idea is that colonialism, as the principal problem of the world, colonialism would quite possibly come to an end in the 1860s and the 1870s, right? So what it means is you're likely to destroy the British Empire with this. And that would then say World War I could quite easily have been avoided. Because what is World War I? World War I is the death rattle, the death agony of the British Empire. The British are so weak by 1914 that they can only survive by playing other countries one against the other, right? Play France against Germany, play Russia against Germany, play Japan against Germany, right? All the rest of this stuff.
Japan against Russia. Japan against Russia. Teddy Roosevelt was in on that, right?
No, I'm talking the First World War now. Japan attacks Russia in the First World Germany. I'm sorry, in the First World War, they take all the colonies, right? That's the World War I. People forget that Japan is on the side of the Allies, not Germany, in World War I. But the point is, colonialism comes to an end. No World War I, likely, because the British Empire has been destroyed. No communism, no fascism, no World War II, and again, no Vietnam War, because the French have been kicked out of Vietnam. They've had to pull their troops out to defend the motherland because France is going to be rolled over by Prussia. You get the idea? This extremely interesting.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, we can call it World War Zero. It had occurred. Before World War. It would have been a
world war, and it would have been the right lineup rather than the wrong lineup. In other words, it would have said, let's have the powers that are by and large progressive, technologically oriented, pro-science.
Non-colonial.
That's absolutely the critical point. No colonies. Yeah. Again, U.S., Russia, Prussia, Italy, there are no colonies there, right? None of them have any colonies at that point. So it means that colonialism disappears about a century earlier. So all of human progress is accelerated forward. It also shows...
If you believe that it's actually disappeared, I think it's just under the table, with other means, but, not overt as it used to be.
Formally... there were colonies, and
there still are. It's just that they got strongmen instead of their armies.
Look, the point is that if this had occurred in the 1860s and 1870s, this would have really brought an end to colonialism, because the main colonial powers would have been defeated, and they would have been crushed, and their colonies would have been taken away. So we would have had something, I think. Very different. And what it also shows is how reactionary the Confederate States of America were, right? You can imagine an entity based on human slavery, which is anathema to most of the rest of the human race. That's the Confederacy.
Cozying right up to colonialism, the birds of a feather, right?
Right. And the other thing is that the plan, you can look at the London Economist, the plan was that the Confederate States of America would expand into the Caribbean and South America, and that would all be a slave empire. And of course,
we kind of had a little bit like that, with Chile and the rest of it. But anyway, listen, Webster, the music means we're done. Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be in touch. I'm gonna dragoon you back here to continue this as soon as possible.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Tom. And please remember, go on C-SPAN, click on Tarpley, Russia's participation in the civil wars, the Russian fleet. Touch it and help me get that rebroadcast against Carino and all.